I'm so glad you're here today. You have a doctorate in chemical engineering. It's my understanding that most natural gas pipelines, and we talked about them, are not equipped to ship blends of methane and hydrogen where the hydrogen component is greater than 20%. Could you please explain to all of us how a conventional natural gas pipeline differs from a pipeline which is capable of shipping blends with more than 20% hydrogen?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Senator Barrasso. So hydrogen, being such a small molecule and corrosive, can create cracks and attack imperfections that lead to metal embrittlement. So the solution would be, short of what was already discussed about potentially recoding existing networks, but for existing infrastructure, the solution would be for natural gas, to have hydrogen, you would want either a different carbon steel or you would want it to be thicker, or both.
So what would be the impact then in the cost of constructing, from conventional natural gas pipelines versus a pipeline that does all the things that you just described?
So the cost difference really depends on the size of the pipeline and the pressure. So often a number of 10% higher is used, but NIST did a great study that was published in 2018 that said that depending on the pipeline size and the pressure of the pipeline, that cost would range from 10% up to almost nearly 70%. So it's certainly non-trivial.
Okay. So then Mr. Powers, as someone who supports all forms of energy, including hydrogen, it's clear that we need and want private sector investment to drive hydrogen development. I understand private sector investors may want more certainty about regulation than they have at this early stage. At the same time, excessive regulation hurts industry development. So what can you talk about that balance of, and what kind of attributes of economic regulation would help the development of hydrogen infrastructure?
Yes, Senator, thank you for the question. I grew up in Williston, North Dakota. My family is in the energy business and has been for 50-some years. I have seen all forms of energy. I've worked on solar projects, hydro projects. I think the key to that is certainty and predictability in any regulatory regime, especially one which is going to regulate some kind of economic activity. I also believe that some kind of consumer protections are important where industries like pipeline industries have monopolistic tendencies, because you don't want to hinder the development of efficient markets and industries. And then finally, I think you have to be very conscious of the scope of your regulation, especially when you're starting on a new industry that has, what, 1,600 miles of pipeline? That's my response.
So Mr. Zamarin, then in terms of some certainty, Congress enacted the Natural Gas Act 1938 to meet a significant challenge. At the U.S. Supreme Court has put it, the purpose of the act is to encourage the orderly development of plentiful supplies of natural gas at reasonable prices. So multiple states are involved. They've come up with this. The Act's citing provisions helped to solve this problem, and our natural gas pipeline network became the envy of the world. But over the last 18 months in the Biden administration, the FERC has made it harder to get pipelines approved. So does Congress need to be careful in terms of any changes to the Natural Gas Act to ensure that change is not going to enable the Commission to make it even harder and put even additional burdens on pipeline construction?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And yes, Congress does need to be cautious. I think that Congress can actually enhance the legislation to address the deficiencies that currently exist and are being attacked by certain parties to stop critical infrastructure. In my written testimony, I talk about establishing FERC's authority for issuing permits, about not allowing states to issue permits, but they should provide input. FERC should have the final answer, and we should be able to build infrastructure once it's gone through a very rigorous environmental review process. That should be the final answer, and we should be able to build that infrastructure. Today, it takes 4 to 5 years to build a pipeline that we can construct in under a year because of permitting. That absolutely needs to be addressed.
The cost. Asking what it does to the cost.
What does that do to the cost, Senator Manchin is wondering?
The regulatory burden? Yeah. It's incredible. I mean, we used to have a rule of thumb that it would cost $1 million a mile to build a large diameter pipeline. It can now cost $8 to $20 million a mile.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. And then, Dr. Crooker, finally, you talked about Wyoming being a hydrogen headwater state. You spoke about using natural gas as a source of producing hydrogen. What other energy sources are available to produce hydrogen in Wyoming?
Well, we have quite a bit available, so it might come as a surprise, but we are still interested in using coal to produce hydrogen. If it's going to work anywhere, it would be Wyoming. We obviously have low-cost coal, massive CO2 storage, and there's even opportunities to blend coal and biomass gasification to try to reach carbon-negative hydrogen. So, of course, I've already talked about natural gas. We have an advanced nuclear reactor being built in the state that is slated for electricity production, but we're focused on a nuclear industry that could also be used to create hydrogen. Then, of course, our renewable resources as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Powell,